All right, well, welcome to Clergy Talk Podcast. The world wants to know, and if you would you please kindly introduce yourself to my guests, to my audience, rather.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I'm Jake Dorberenz, president of Theophany Media, an organization for Christian creatives, just trying to kind of creatively, uniquely communicate Christ into the world. And I'm a writer and podcaster, and also an associate minister at my local church. So wear a couple different hats, but I like to do a lot of different things. So that's how it works out.
All right, that sounds wonderful. So basically, tell me, how did you get involved in ministry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always kind of had a passion for Jesus that was a little bit more than just the average person's passion. And so I always felt kind of really compelled in that direction. And I kind of wanted to be a Christian in a lot of different spaces. For a second there, I was like, ooh, you know what? We need more scientists that are Christians. And then I was like, well, we need more lawyers that are Christians. And I still think those are true. But eventually I'm like, well, I can't do everything, even though I just said earlier I'm kind of trying to do everything. So I settled on ministry as like the best place to just sort of be able to affect a wide amount of people. When I minister, I can encourage those people to be the best Christian in sales, the best Christian in woodworking, whatever the kind of things they're doing. So I can kind of live through them in a sense.
All right, that makes a lot of sense, because we do need Christian lawyers and scientists, and the whole 9 yards. We need Christians in all fields and all walks of life. That's very, very important. So today's topic, we're going to be talking a little bit about theology, which is a very broad field. You got theology all through the Bible, everywhere. You can find theology in every verse, every chapter, every page. So let's start with the very beginning. Do you feel like enough Christians are reading the Old Testament?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, when we go to like children's church or Sunday school, you get a lot of those Old Testament stories. Those are kind of the fun ones, right? We teach Noah's Ark and David and Goliath. But when it comes to like adulthood and actually like seriously engaging, yeah, we kind of ignore the Old Testament. We're just like, that's not important. Jesus isn't there. Although you could maybe kind of argue Jesus is kind of there in some cases. So yeah, adult Christians tend to kind of ignore it. We know like the basic stories, but a lot of people haven't actually really read and engaged and dived into it. So it's definitely a problem.
Exactly, because that's what he taught from when he was here walking around, because there was no New Testament. So that's all they had was the Old Testament. So, and that's all the Apostle Paul had was the other apostles was the Old Testament before the New Testament finally got completed 30-something years after the fact. They just had the Old Testament when they walked into the synagogues to teach from, and that's why I try to encourage people to read more of the Old Testament, because you really need to develop that strong foundation, so when you do read the New Testament, you kind of comes a little bit more clear for everything.
Yeah, definitely. I've used the example before of, if you're into like Marvel movies or something like that, or these movies that have these like cinematic universes, if you want to understand the latest big superhero movie, you kind of have to have watched the other movies to get the story.
Exactly.
So when we get into the New Testament, we got to, quote unquote, watch the other movies so that we understand here's what's happening.
Exactly. So I think if you read my message I sent you, we're just going to jump into a little bit of covenant theology, dispensationalism, which is something I'm not much of a supporter of dispensationalism, even though it kind of like popped up the last few years where a lot of pastors are talking about dispensations and Some people go up to 7 dispensations. So what's your take on all that?
Yeah. I would probably lean more towards covenant theology over dispensations.
Exactly.
If I had to pick a dog in the fight. Both have merits, I think. It's ways to sort of organize. Like, we recognize there is something a little bit different about what's going on in the Old Testament compared to the New, or what's going on with Abraham, before Moses' law. Like, yeah, there's definitely something different going on. But I think the kind of the covenant theology is a little bit better way to understand it. God's not just like changing the rules of the universe so much as he's entering into a different kind of relationship with people.
Exactly, because with covenant theology, it's kind of like, okay, I do understand now the relationship I have with God based on this covenant, So when we look at the Noachic covenant, we say, okay, now God said he's not going to destroy the world no more with water based on the rainbow, which is the Noachic covenant. And when we see that rainbow, we connect to that. And then and that as well as the Davidic covenant, Abrahamic covenant, and the other covenants. So as far as dispensationalism, I can't even figure out how they got to 7 dispensations, to tell you the truth.
Right, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough.
Exactly. So tell me, what are some of the books of the Bible that really just kind of like grabbed onto you when you started your studies?
Man, I really got started with Genesis has always been a curious one because, it's controversial and it's hard to understand at parts. And I've flip-flopped across the board on trying to figure out exactly what's going on and what it's supposed to mean today. So that's kind of one that really kind of first grabbed me. But then as I got further into biblical studies, I think Ecclesiastes is actually maybe one of my favorite books, kind of a depressing one at some parts.
Yeah.
But it's about this teacher, this preacher that we usually say is Solomon, who's just trying to kind of figure out the meaning of life, basically. And then what happens in like the last couple verses in Ecclesiastes, let's see, 12:13, if I remember, it says, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man.
Right.
So the meaning of life, right there. Fear God, listen to God. That's the only thing that does have meaning. Riches, work, all of that going to pass away, doesn't matter. But God is what matters.
That happens to be a reoccurring conclusion when we look at the Bible as a whole. It's like keep the commandments, follow Jesus, believe the gospel, love God, love your neighbor. Those are like reoccurring themes in the Bible that pop up all the time. As well as when we pay close attention to what we're reading, we see that justice is also a real big theme for God.
Oh yeah, no doubt about that. The prophets especially are really concerned with the commandments of God, but specifically the commandments that people forget about, like justice and not mistreating the poor and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, a huge theme throughout Scripture: love God, love other people. If you had to kind of summarize it.
Exactly. So when we look at the 21st century and the different routes that theology has started taking the last, say, 50 years, what's your take on all that?
Wow, yeah. Big question, definitely. I think there's a lot of interesting things in theology right now. There's a lot of return to some kind of older ways of thinking, which can be good and bad. I'm a young person. I'm 24 years old myself, and a lot of people my age, we're in this generation, kind of millennial Gen Z, who are sort of stereotypically leaving the church, and a lot of them are just leaving Christianity. But there's also a good group of young people that are kind of rediscovering the church. I know a lot of people my age who like, the church fathers and,
Right.
Augustine, all those people. And they're just kind of starting to appreciate the wisdom of the past, but don't like how Christianity was done in like the 1800s. So they're just kind of like looping back. And so I think that's actually a pretty good trend. You do have to be kind of careful. Those church fathers, so to speak, they're not infallible.
Right.
But yeah, there's a lot of wisdom there that I think we kind of strayed from. So I'm kind of excited about that direction in theology. We do have a tendency, though, to jump into different camps in theology, which has always happened, of course. But nowadays with social media, you can really see the polarization and how, some people couldn't have a conversation. If you're a dispensationalist, couldn't have a conversation with somebody who believes in covenant theology. To me, that's kind of crazy. But for some people, that's so dividing. So that's a trend that's concerning to me.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Now, I always tell people that church history is for all Christians. It's not just for any one specific group of Christians. It's part of the entire Christian historical spectrum. We all should look at church history and see how things developed. I think people don't know enough about the Reformation, the Reformers, and what they did, and the battle for the books, the battle for the canon, which is always an interesting topic because some churches have an open canon, some have a closed canon. And I tell people all the time, well, in the 21st century, you can own as many books as you want to read from. But personally, as a sermon, I probably only teach from the 66 books of the Bible. That's my preference. But there's other pastors that might talk about Enoch, which is very controversial, even though Enoch didn't write Enoch. However, it's a very popular book. It's a very popular book now. It's gotten very popular because a couple celebrities started talking about Enoch. Next thing you know, everybody's talking about Enoch. So that's my take on that. So when we look at, here's the point I'm going to get back to: millennials. I know you speak their language because you're 24. And probably a lot of people your age, and if I had drawn out conversations with individuals your age. So the ones that are leaving the church, what is their mindset?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of people have been burned by the church infrastructure, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
They see the hypocrites and the abusive pastors and those that want to kind of that sort of want to like rein in on them and sort of suggest this is the only box of theology, and if you're outside of this, we don't care about you at all.
Right.
They've had those experiences, and they have been burned by that. And so there's a lot of them that like the character Jesus, but they don't really like those Christians. I think that's a Gandhi quote. I like your Christ, but not your Christians, I believe.
Right. I think I heard that before somewhere. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can't blame some of them. Of course, I can never wish somebody to leave the faith.
Right.
I still think Christianity has the best thing to offer that there is out there.
True.
But yeah, some churches are just not embodying the characteristics of Jesus, so they kind of jump ship.
Yeah. Well, one of my arguments is that you go meet somebody at a nightclub, you get burnt, but you're still going back to the nightclub every weekend, You go to church and get burnt by somebody, now you want to leave the church altogether. It doesn't make any sense. So if you're going to apply that philosophy, you need to apply it all the way across the board. However, all churches aren't the same. All seminary schools aren't the same. All pastors are not the same, And each and every Christian that you meet, and here's another good example. when you go into a church, you're actually going into a hospital. Because most people that spend the most time in church usually are broken, and they're just trying to get the pieces put back together again. And the ones who have been put on the right path, they're there to give back because they were broken before. And when God rescued them and restored them, now they just want to give back and do, what the Lord said to do, go speak to the heartbroken, the lost, the brokenhearted, and so on and so forth. So.
Yeah, no, I definitely think you're right. I mean, like I said, there's a part of me that really feels for these people that are leaving the church, but then a part of me that wants to say, give us another chance. Like, I've seen the worst, but there's good out there. And there is some extent where I do think sometimes we're just called to be a part of local churches that maybe don't 100% agree with us, maybe aren't perfect. In my church, it's not like, not every Sunday do I leave absolutely super duper on fire. Sometimes not quite, but that's not a reason to leave the church. Some of that's on me. Some of that's just on the fact of life that we can't always be 100% mountaintop experience on fire. And so, I do try to encourage people, okay, well, stop looking for perfection because it doesn't exist.
Right.
But, look for a church community that's trying to follow Jesus, embody Jesus, lives the scriptures. There are some like base things I think we need to check off, but then then it's like, well, get involved. What can you give to the community rather than, what does the community give you?
That makes a lot of sense. And on some Sundays, that message may not be for you on that Sunday. That message might be for someone else, And that might be a message you've already heard about 30 times already, but there might be one person in that church that God wants to hear that specific message that the pastor happens to be teaching.
Sure.
So when we look at it from that perspective, and when you think about it, if you spend a lot of hours reading, I know you have your master's degree, right?
That's right.
Right, that's beautiful. So, that's a lot of writing and research papers and theses and the whole 9 yards. When I got my 2 certificates, and I tell this joke a lot of times, when I got my 2 certificates, I was ready to take a nap. So I know how you felt.
Oh yeah, big long nap, that's for sure.
So I never really turned off the studying perspective because I'm consistently listening to lectures and listening to professors and listening to different arguments on the different books of the Bible. I was listening to a lecture the other day on the whole argument about the Nephilim thing, about the giants and all that, and how the professor basically took the perspective, which is a known perspective, that that we were talking about 2 lines, the line of Cain and the line of God, that intermingled and created the wicked, people running around on earth, versus there being a literal angels coming down and mating with women, which happens to be another big debate that's going on in the theological community. And since I brought that up, what's your take on it?
Oh boy, I don't know. That's a tough one. I probably lean more towards the idea of like for the Nephilim. It says they're born of the sons of God, daughters of men.
Right.
And sons of God does seem to be used sometimes of like angels or something, so maybe more that angle, but I don't know. That's a confusing
that's
one.
A hard
I've seen
one.
a lot of good
That's a hard
arguments
one.
on
I've seen some real powerhouses argue over that one. So, but the bottom line is, since God used the flood and wiped everybody out except the 8 souls, Noah and his family, then they really shouldn't be an issue anymore. However, there are some people that are saying the giants are back. The giants are back. I said, well, how can they be back when God wiped them out with the flood? So
interesting.
So that's another one of those hard topics that kind of like have to have Christians debating against each other consistently and constantly. That's one of those topics, and Of
Right.
course, the old saying in Christian is we can agree to disagree, which I don't really like that. I feel like we got to find out what the truth is.
Sure. No, I think you're right. I'm the kind of guy who likes to know the truth. I want to know the answer.
Right.
So sometimes we maybe jump too quickly to the agree to disagree.
Exactly.
Jesus does say there's a point where you, well, in a little different situation, but you shake off the dust from your sandals and move on, kind of thing.
Right.
So I think there's a place for that, but after you try really hard to kind of figure out the truth and come to agreement. But
right.
yeah, I would say for Christians should never stop learning.
Right.
There's not a point where we just figured it out and now we're good.
Right. I think the dust shaking off part comes down to when someone just all out rejects Christ,
Oh, sure, certainly. Certainly.
And I definitely believe that, because sitting up trying to tell somebody that Jesus loves them, God loves you, and you can have eternal life, and they're like laughing in your face and mocking you, well, then at that point you might want to go ahead and just try the next potential candidate, versus the other part, and maybe that's not your day to reach that person. Maybe somebody else will reach them maybe a month from now. You never know what God has in store for that person. So yeah, we look at that, and then of course,
definitely.
Of course, we look at right now, today, this world, everything that's going on, lifestyles, politics, everything, just the world's on fire, everything's going crazy. The Christians are now the bad guys. We've always been the bad guys, but we're the bigger bad guys now. As long as we stay in our lane, we're tolerated. How do you navigate now in that type of environment?
Wow, yeah. I think we have to keep continuing to show the world that Christianity is actually good. And, we do that through a bunch of different ways, through our speech and our actions, just the way we live. And that doesn't mean it's going to convince everybody. But what is it, 2 Peter, 1 Peter, one of those that talks about this idea of, be above reproach. So when people say something about you, your life is so good that that doesn't hold up because everybody knows that guy is pretty good. He wouldn't do that. Something like that. That's the paraphrase version. So I think that's part of the answer in some ways. There's a return right now to classical apologetics. Apologetics is this word meaning defend the faith. But how the 2nd century guys, like Justin Martyr and those old church dudes, how they did apologetics wasn't so much like, let me prove the existence of God. It was more, let me show you like Christians are really good. And in that time, even non-Christian Roman statesmen would say, hey, I got to admit, the Christians are way better than our regular Roman citizens. They help the poor more.
Right.
They do, that kind of reputation is what we need to start developing. And so when the world says about Christians that we're the bad guys, some of that, okay, I get where you're coming from. There have been some bad actors. And some of that, I think it's just a complete falsehood.
Right. Anytime they catch a pastor that has done something morally incorrect, they make sure he's in the news front page, every page. He's blasted on social media. He's everywhere. But when you have a small church that's out there really doing the work for the Lord, nobody cares. Nobody talks about them because nobody want to hear about them. They want to hear about the dirt. I think that's just the nature of people. And unfortunately, I'll say this. In this day and age, because of the media, whenever a Christian apologetics person debates the popular atheists of the day, it gets a lot of attention, even at universities, when they have those debates between Christians and atheists. I don't know what the results are of that all the time. I don't know if anybody from Team A, Team A and Team C or Team B gets converted over to either side. I would hope no Christians become an atheist after hearing a debate with a Christian and an atheist debater. I hope that would never happen.
Right.
And you would hope that someone who's an atheist actually comes to Christ, but of course it takes God to open people's hearts and to bring them into the fold. Amen. And we can only plant the seeds. So those are pretty interesting. I had a guest on my show about maybe a week and a half ago, and he was talking about that our kids, like under 12, are really getting beat up now in school because when they express a love for the Lord and a love for Christ and start talking a little bit about Christian values, it's now the big no-no unless they're going to a Christian school. So have you noticed any of that or have heard any talk about that lately in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, so I'm from Oregon, which is, a more progressive state.
Okay.
And I went to public school there. So I was in the belly of the beast, so to speak.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's the way public schools are. They were terrible when I was growing up.
Yeah, it probably wasn't as bad as maybe other people have experienced. Hard to say if I was persecuted. Now, I was also a really passionate, vocal kind of guy that would probably talk too much in class. Right. So when I got in trouble, it probably wasn't persecution. It was more, I'm not behaving right. So there's some of that to it. But yeah, it's tough. Like, I knew some teachers that were Christian, but having to kind of tiptoe through the system, make sure everything is above board, it can be difficult. There was a lot of times where I wasn't ever really made fun of, but other students just couldn't wrap their heads around Christian belief. And I even know that, because Christianity is just a part of history and that's unavoidable, we would actually learn a little bit about the start of Christianity and Jesus and that kind of thing. Although the kinds of things we would learn were definitely something that didn't quite line up with the Christian, the church version of things. They never said, like, Jesus wasn't God. They didn't come out and directly say that because they didn't want to offend people, but definitely their kind of historical look at things was very different than the church. And I remember one teacher talking about how actually Jesus was probably super rich because the area he lived in, if he was a carpenter, he would have actually made really good money. And I don't even know how historically accurate that is, but it's definitely not something the Bible portrays.
Right, it's not.
So I was like, that's kind of weird. So yeah. I got those kinds of experiences. It could be different now.
Yeah.
It probably depends on different parts of the country. So I survived. I survived with my faith intact. Right. But it wasn't necessarily easy. Right. And now I will say, though, I definitely got a reputation for being a Christian, which I think helped out a lot. Sometimes, that good reputation goes a long way. So I was never invited to any bad parties or nobody tried to tempt me down a bad path because they're like, Jake is this solid Christian. Why even try to tempt him or anything like that? So I think that actually helped. And I remember I met one guy once. I went to a big high school. I met him, and he's like, "Oh, you're Jake. You're that Christian guy." So like my reputation had preceded me in that way, and I think there were some advantages to that. And hopefully, years later, maybe when I go to my high school reunion, somebody says, "Jake, your life, your speech, your actions impacted me.
Right.
I never forgot.
Right.
So, not that it's all about me, but hopefully that is something that comes through, even when there's persecution or difficulty as a Christian in that kind of environment. That's why I'm so passionate about, like, and this shouldn't be controversial, but Christians should be good. They should be good people.
Yeah, that's true.
And
it's biblical.
And some people can struggle with that, specifically to speech and anger, I think, and our response to persecution. If we are being persecuted, the way we should respond, the biblical way, is, sometimes Paul had to move on to the next city after he just got stoned. Instead of yelling about it, he just went on. Let's go to the new platform. Let's go to the new place. Where can I make an impact? If they don't want me here, where can I go? So I think that's that's a way we should respond. And I think people would take note of that and be like, that's different. And I'm interested in that. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because we should have a good name. We shouldn't be persecuted for being wicked or breaking the law.
Definitely.
If you're persecuted for breaking the law, you're pretty much getting what you deserve, because you shouldn't be breaking the law anyway. So if we're persecuted for having a good name, that's good, because somebody's going to say, wait a minute, Jake's not like that. Why are you guys getting all these rumors about Jake? Because I know Jake and I've been around him for a long, long time, and I really don't think that stuff is true. So when you think about that, and you never know who's watching and who's looking, and who you are influencing, and who looks at you as a role model. It may be somebody out there who's just trying to lead that lifestyle, and you're their breath of fresh air, you're their inspiration, because you're not living the lifestyle that they don't really like to be in, so. Yeah, so that's, did I lose you? All right. Thought we had a bad connection for a second. Still there?
Yeah, a little bit of bad connection, but
yeah, we had a bad connection. It drifted for a second. It drifted for a second. So you are a minister, correct?
College minister, but now I'm kind of in a more, I call myself the miscellaneous minister, so sort of associate pastor kind of role. Just do what needs to be done here and there.
Right, exactly. You do teach your sermons and teach your classes and things of that nature as well, right?
Yeah, and help out, and specifically kind of trying to get church involvement and do service projects and other things like that. A little harder in the era of COVID, but we're making it work.
So what are the questions people are asking you?
Well, it wasn't that long ago when I was doing college ministry, and that of course is sort of a fun role, and you kind of get on the pulse. You get to feel the pulse of the next generation of Christians. And yeah, a lot of them are wondering about how to start spiritual habits. When you're a college student, you're suddenly oftentimes out from your parents' home.
Right.
You're not there anymore. They're not driving you to church. Now you got to make those decisions. They're not leading Bible study. You got to do that yourself. Those kind of things. So there's definitely a struggle with how do I balance all that stuff with also the time and stress of college? And what I always try to communicate is, time is not really the issue. Everybody says, whether you're in college or not, I don't have enough time to read the Bible, to go to church, to do X, Y, or Z. I don't have enough time. And I always say, actually, you do. I mean, it's about priorities. You can rearrange things. If God is a priority, you can put God in your schedule in the day. It can work. It might mean sacrificing other stuff, but if God's really a super duper priority, it shouldn't be an issue.
Right.
So those kind of things come up a lot. spiritual disciplines and habits, and you know, a lot of these college students maybe had some like youth camp experiences where they're on fire for God, and now they're like, well, I don't feel close. I don't have that relationship again. How do I spark that relationship again?
Right. And I guess you get that X amount of group of people to say that now that I'm away from home, I ain't got to go to church no more. You probably get those folks too as well.
Yeah, there's certainly those people, or, you know, I know a lot of people my age who think they can do the whole Christian thing without church.
Right.
And there are some things you can do, private Bible study and etc., you know, away from a church building. And I don't think it's even about a church building or about, you know, a church structure, or but the community of saints, of fellow believers, is so much more important. It's not about checking off a box. It's about having people in your corner, supporting you, encouraging you. You invest in them, they invest in you.
Exactly.
That's what the church is supposed to be about.
Well, considering the fact they didn't have the first official church till about, 300 AD? And prior to that, they were meeting in houses and homes, and I'm sure they had a couple of cases in the synagogues before they got ran out. But the first official church didn't get built till 300 AD, and Christianity did fine without the official Christian church building. So in many ways, yes, Christianity is not a building, but you know, yes, there's a structure. When we look at the Bible, we see a structure. You know, it's not a free form event, but I think fellowship is very important for all Christians. Wherever you go in life, you want to know you got that one Christian friend that understands exactly, you know, what you're going through on a daily basis. And if you got 5 or 6 or 7 Christian friends in the same location, that's even better.
Oh, yeah, exactly, definitely. And that's what the early church, that's how they grew. They had the strong support base that encouraged them to go out into the world and to live their lives. And, you know, they met together all the time and ate together and shared money and land, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And I think that's what made them so successful. They had that support. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, financially, they had the support of others. And I think a lot of people miss out on that.
Yeah. And it was all for a good cause versus getting the pastor a private jet, which I'm still baffled by that one. I haven't figured that one out yet at all, you know. Most of the pastors that I knew, they may had a couple cars, but they were all secondhand cars. There were no extravagant vehicles, like there was no Mercedes-Benz or Bentleys or nothing like that. They were just regular second-class cars. You know, they might have had one good family car, but it wasn't a luxury vehicle. But you know, I think that's some of the reasons why a lot of people were saying, well, I'm not going to church. You know, we got the pastors running around in a Humvee, and we don't even live in the mountains. So, so when you look at that,
yeah, you're right.
Yeah, when you look at that, that's a real good argument somebody could make. But then again, you got to tell a person, this is what I tell a person all the time. Before you can judge Christianity, I need you to go to every church in America. And then after you've done that process, then tell me how we're doing. You know, because it's easy to find a couple of bad pastors out there, a couple of bad churches out there, you know. We can even make an argument, well, you guys don't even agree on the same thing, so why should I be a Christian? Well, we all agree that Jesus Christ saves. That's one thing we all agree on. I have not met one Christian that didn't agree on the fact that Jesus Christ was crucified and he was resurrected and he does save. So that's one thing we all agree on. So,
yeah.
But there's other theological issues and doctrinal disputes that take place. But when you think about it, they disputed with Jesus Christ. You know, they disagree with his theology. And they disagree with the apostles, and even the rabbis disagreed and fought each other. So what makes anyone think that in the 21st century, everyone's going to come together on the same page based on the fact that this is the information age and there's more stuff out there that you got to kind of like get your brain around and figure it out. So there's going to be a lot of disagreements on a lot of different areas of Christianity. So with that being said, how do you deal with those type of disputes?
You're talking about like church disputes?
Yeah.
Theology disputes?
Theological disputes?
Yeah. Man, it's tough. It's really challenging. So I actually, one of my hats is I teach middle school debate at a Christian school. And so we do a type of debate called Lincoln Douglas, and I won't go into that. But it's called a values debate. And the whole point of the debate is, yeah, you can argue your side, but everything boils down to what is your value. You have to win based off of the value. So you say, my side supports life the best, or my side supports global happiness or something. You pick some kind of value.
Right.
And then your opponent has a value as well. Well, there's a lot of parallels, I think, to any kind of theological dispute. We have to prove what's our ultimate value here. And I'm hoping that looks a little something like Jesus. What's the common ground we can create so that we can have that discussion? Because, if you're having a discussion and one person's value is personal freedom, and another person's value is security. I mean, it's a little bit more of a political kind of thing. But in a theological sense, like if one person is really valuing this particular book of the Bible, and then you're valuing, if this book is more authoritative or something, then we're going to have an issue. So what's the common ground? Well, hopefully that's the person of Jesus. Does this theology, does this view relate to who Jesus is, how Jesus lived? Is this really what Jesus was all about? Because, you could argue maybe there's some kind of contradictions in Scripture, or at least, some books talk more about grace and others more about law. There's those kind of things that totally exist. But when it comes down to it, okay, well, what does Jesus seem to be more about? What does he look? What does he do? And if we kind of center it on Jesus, who is the Son of God, the representation of God, the best view of God we have, I don't know. I think maybe we'll be able to kind of settle some of those disputes, or at least sort of understand each other, very least. Exactly.
Well, unfortunately, the grace and works debate is still going on in the 21st century. It seems like that won't go anywhere. I guess if you went to a reformed seminary school, then you're definitely going to be hitting them with the works thing all day long. I said, okay, now. I've been in that conversation a couple of times.
Sure.
So, that makes a lot of sense. I think the biggest thing I got from seminary school was to have a Christ-centered ministry.
Definitely.
And I think that's important. If every church has a Christ-centered ministry, Christ-centered teachings, if somebody walks into the church for the very first time, they're going to say, I better find out a little bit more about Jesus Christ, since the pastor spoke about Jesus about 65 times in the service. So
Sure, definitely.
It must be something to that, to Jesus. So that makes a lot of sense right there. Because of course, when we look at theological debates, I think a lot of it has to do with what a person was raised up in, one. Two, what a person might got introduced to later on as they start maturing, in their faith and begin to really digging deeper into Scripture. And it all depends on what theology book they've read too, because when I started out, before I actually went to school, I read several different theology books, and most of them said the same thing. The vast majority of them said the same thing. There really wasn't any different when I read theology books written by Christian authors. But when I read books about like a comparative theology and stuff like that, that's when it got kind of cuckoo. When people started trying to blend everything together. I think that goes back to the point where you're talking about people like Jesus, but they don't like Christians. So they take the Jesus and they try to blend him in with everybody. So, and then you get a new Jesus, one that's not represented in the Bible, one that they've created. Just like every so often, you'll find somebody trying to create a new religion by combining Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, and roll everything together, and you have one new, different hybrid religion. Well, that doesn't work too well.
Yeah,
that doesn't work too well at all. So, and I think what we see now today, that a lot of the New Agers have created their version of Jesus, which has basically have a lot of our youth, not just the youth, but some of our older folks into bondage because they got mad at the church, left the church, and found something spiritual that's a little bit less demanding.
Yeah. Christian sociologist Christian Smith, he coined this term, spiritual but not religious, that we sometimes use. And it's true. A lot of people are interested in kind of spiritual questions now. Like, just, for a hot second there, it seemed like everybody was like really like pro science and facts. But now spirituality is kind of making a comeback. But they're not. But they kind of want to be spiritual without the religious system.
Right.
And that's where you get a lot of the New Age kind of stuff, kind of a little pick and choose, salad bar kind of theology, and it can take people away from established religion.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of big argument, because everybody talks about, the biggest quote I hear is that they use religion to control people. Well, I see a lot of control in politics too now. Yeah. If you want to make that argument.
That's totally right.
If this last election is a prime result of that. People losing friends over the fact that you're a Republican or a Democrat, and these are Christian Republicans and Christian Democrats who are now not talking to each other. So I think there's more control in the political field than the field of religion myself.
Totally. Yeah.
So when we look at the big picture of everything, somebody always has an argument to why they don't want to believe in God. Let's take for instance, the old Big Bang problem, the problem with the Big Bang. When you have scientists who are not even Christians, who are now saying the Big Bang is not even, plausible anymore. So when you have scientists who are not Christians are saying that, and then you have other scientists to say, well, in order for us to get our grant money, we have to be pro Big Bang and pro evolution. So, that's nothing but a political decision on their part. So how do you actually address people when they talk about the Big Bang and evolution and all that, and you're trying to win them over to Christ? How do you address that?
Yeah, well, I've changed my mind on a lot of those things over the years. I think in some cases, well, let me just say this. What I've kind of come down to is Genesis has a lot of great theology, but there's a lot of things it's not trying to be. It's not trying to prescribe I do think it's historical, but what I mean is it's not like a textbook. It's not trying to prescribe, here's the steps, here's exactly, here's a window into history.
Right.
What it's mainly trying to do is teach us theology about God as the creator.
Right,
so
right.
I'm willing to be friends with evolutionists and friends with not evolutionists and those kind of things, because ultimately it doesn't matter as long as we're on board about God being the creator. So that's one of those things where it's like, okay, I can see some flaws in the science here about evolution, but I also kind of get why people are on board with it. So I've reached more of a point where it's like, I don't really even have an opinion on it. If we believe God's the creator, Jesus is the savior, sure. Sounds good. You can keep believing that unless it proves to be a destructive kind of pattern. Or if you're, because some people would say, to to be a Christian means you can't believe any of that. And then other people would say, if you want to be an intelligent Christian, you have to believe in evolution. So there's people on both sides that I don't want to give in to those extremes. And the middle ground can be dangerous, but for something like that, I think it's probably, I've come to the conclusion that it's okay to just say, sure, as long as we agree on the main values, you go the direction you want. I don't know.
Right. I think
That's really controversial.
The past few years, theistic evolution has taken off. And I've heard people debate that, which got ugly.
Mm-hmm.
It got really ugly. Because now they're saying, well, you're trying to take science and blend it in with the Bible. You hear that one.
Right.
And then, of course, the theistic evolution folks, as far as they're concerned, they don't see themselves doing anything wrong because they're giving God the glory, So I think to avoid being a distraction at a social gathering, it's probably good to say, okay, if that's what you believe.
No, that's right. Totally.
And just because note to self, I'm going to do a sermon on that one down the road.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Definitely. So, what have been some of your big challenges in your Christian walk?
Man, yeah. Pride's definitely been a big one. So a little bit more about my journey. When I was in elementary school, my dad took over management of a Christian bookstore. And that kind of changed us. Not like we were bad Christians. We just weren't super educated Christians. And now there's a bookstore with books galore. So you kind of get educated. And so as a very young person, I was very, 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 very convinced about certain beliefs about theology and the world and politics. And so I just kind of let everybody know, like, this is the way. You have to believe this, or else you're not a Christian or something like that, or you're stupid. And so that was a big struggle for me.
Right.
Because, to an extent, it's good to be passionate about God and faith and your views. It's not bad to believe in something or to really like, what you believe. That's not bad. But the issue was for a long time when I was in middle school and a little bit into high school, I started getting a reputation for more of what I was against than what I was for. And that's when I realized, I have a problem. And so then I'd really try to change gears a little bit. I can still hold those beliefs, but what am I really for? What are the things I stand for? Why do I think why do I think people should join the faith? It's not because of, Christianity is not a list of here's all the things to believe and here's the things I don't believe. It's a lifestyle that's compelling because Jesus transforms us and there's all these great things about it, the community. So I wanted to focus more on that.
True.
So yeah, I struggle with, and to some extent still do struggle with, wanting to be right. And online, it's challenging. Social media, I've gotten a lot better about it, but, I used to argue a lot with strangers on the internet about things.
Right.
I still do to some extent, but I choose my battles very carefully. Am I engaging in this conversation out of anger or out of this need to be right or this pride? Or am I actually engaging out of love? If I'm doing it out of love and I actually really want to have this conversation because I care about the person, different story.
Yeah.
Have that conversation. Explain your views. But for me, I struggle a lot with no, you're wrong, and I got to prove to you that you're wrong, and here's the correct thing. So that's been a challenge over my life and still to this day.
Right. I remember when I was when I first went to seminary school back in '91, I felt like that I had to be the sword for Jesus everywhere I went. And at work, I found myself in some pretty pretty serious conversations here. And one day, one of my good friends said to me, you know, Mike, you're not the only person that owns a Bible. And that stayed with me for a long, long time. And I said, you know something? When he told me that, that was a blessing, you know, that God placed upon me that day. And I kind of started toning it down some, you know, because when you think about it, lots of people own Bibles. Lots of people have been led to a great understanding of Scripture by the Holy Spirit by itself alone, versus us folks who've been formally trained and looked at all the intricate details of theology and why we believe this and all the other stuff. Which is it's nice to know that stuff, you know, that's great, but yet and still, lots of people read the Bible and lots of people have come to conclusions without the formal guidance when we think about that. So, and sometimes when you get into denominational wars, we look at the big three, the Protestants, the Catholics, and the Orthodox, you know, the big three. So as the Catholics and the Orthodox, as far as they're concerned, everybody's a Protestant. But we Protestants don't even think like that. You know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
You got people who say, well, I'm Baptist, I'm Pentecostal, you know, I'm part of this church, I'm part of that church, and I'm non-denominational. So it's really kind of hard to figure out what a person actually believes based on the church they go to. So how can you argue with anybody when you got to sit down and really start with point A? What do you believe about point A? Then go to point B, and by the time you know you get done figuring out all the different stuff a person believes, you might scratch your head and go, okay, this conversation might be a very stressful one.
Yeah.
Because they're all over the map, you know, because a lot of people are all over the map because of all the things they've read, all the lectures that they've listened to, because like I said, we're in the informational age, and I've actually learned a lot from many different denominations and churches that I probably would have never even thought about listening to if it wasn't for the internet, you know.
Sure, definitely.
Because that kind of opens up the door and lets me actually look into, let's say, an Orthodox service, or read a commentary by a Catholic, you know, or that, and so on and so forth. So I've learned not to just put anybody in a specific group based on a title about, well, I'm this and I'm that, but you know, you are a human being with an intellect, and hopefully your intellect's being God led, and there are some things about you that we have a common agreement on. And of course, as I said before, that common denominator is always going to be Jesus Christ died and resurrected. That's the common denominator right there. And he said, whomsoever believes in me will be saved, not whoever believes in the theology of Martin Luther will be saved. He didn't say that. Or any other great theologian or great founder of any church across the board. He said, whoever believes in me will be saved. So I think that's the big common denominator that all Christians need to focus on.
Oh, I totally agree. Preach it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what would be some good advice you'll give my listeners before we end this episode?
Yeah, well, since we're talking a lot about kind of controversial issues today and how to engage them, how to talk about different theological perspectives, I want to end with this piece of advice that I've sometimes told my college students and other people I've mentored. To love your enemy also requires you to listen and understand your enemy. If there is somebody who you feel is diametrically opposed to you, one of the most loving things you can do is listen to their perspective. Instead of, like what you're just saying, instead of just jumping to conclusions about them or about what kind of person they must be or what other things they must believe, listen. Let them explain themselves. Give them the benefit of a doubt to an extent. It doesn't mean you have to completely change your mind all the time and just compromise with them and just believe everything they believe. But yeah, it requires you to listen. Loving your enemies means that, yeah, they get a chance to do this human right of being heard. You got to give that, extend that grace to somebody.
Right.
And just, yeah, treat your enemy like human. By you, sometimes we just got to shut up and listen. Is a simple way to put that. So that's what I would leave your audience with.
Definitely. That's definitely some good advice. Well, Jake, I really thank you for being a guest on Clergy Talk Podcast, and maybe later on down the line this year, you can pop back up on my show and let us know what's going on in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you. I'll be praying for you and your ministry and your church and you and your family, and you have a blessed day.
You as well. Thank you.
Bye.
God bless.